Welcome to week 6. Our focus this week for our discussion is going to be on change diffusion. So change diffusion is a little bit different than change adoption. It adds this element of time that change adoption doesn't have, right? So when we talked about in week 5 change adoption and all the different strategies like Cotter's and ADKAR and so forth, we're talking about specific things you can do to get a particular person or a particular group of people, stakeholder group, to change their behavior from this to that, right? And it's all about strategies for doing that, looking at it from their perspective, looking at it from the organizational perspective, and so forth. So that was great, but none of those models really addressed time and change. Really, especially organizational change, big organizational changes take place over time, sometimes rapidly in a short period of time, and sometimes very slowly, gradually over a long period of time. And so, for example, you might just have a simple update to your Microsoft Office software that you're using. And that somebody hits a button and it pushes out all the software updates to everybody. And suddenly the next day, everybody's now working on a new version of Microsoft Word or PowerPoint or whatever. And that change has happened instantly for just about everybody all at once. Of course, they may not necessarily be able to use it effectively on day one, right? So there's not everybody's change journey is going to be the same just because the software changed all at once for everybody. But generally speaking, that's going to be a pretty short learning curve, right? It may take a few days or a few weeks to get everybody now using the new version of Microsoft Office and comfortable enough with it that they can get their work done. So that's a relatively short time frame. And one where it's a relatively simple change that happens all at once. But most organizational changes are not like that. If you restructure an organization, you're trying to go after the organizational culture and trying to shift it in some way. You're merging with another organization. There may be a moment in time when the change sort of takes place, when it rolls out, when with the merger of two companies, there's a particular date when the new business entity takes over. And as of that date, everybody's now working as part of the merged company. So it may seem like the change happened overnight, but really the change is going to be happening over the weeks and months, possibly years even, while those two organizational cultures are combining and melting into one. And so as organizational change agents, we need to be mindful of time and how we structure our strategy, our change strategy, to support change over time, not just support change for one particular group on one particular day, but change over time for the whole organization. Because change diffusion also is not just about time, but it's also about spreading a change out across the whole organization. Think of it like a little pebble hitting a lake and the ripple effect, right, stretching out across the lake. That's what diffusion's all about, right? You're rolling out a change, and on day one it makes a big splash, but then the ripples of it are going to continue to extend out in the days and weeks and months and possibly years to come. So you as a change leader have to be in it for the long haul, right? Your job isn't just to roll out a change, it's to see it all the way through and make sure that the whole organization makes the change in behaviors and attitudes that are needed to support whatever the initiative is. So your change strategy needs to address that. And so we're going to talk today about how to make sure you do that as far as your team project, and how you can work the different reading assignments into that and make sure that you're applying it through your team project. So anyway, let me share my screen. Give me a moment. Screen 4, there you are, sir. All right, so you should be seeing the course screen. We're on week 6. So the week 6 resources this week, a number of good ones. So we have our standard for change management. So there's a section of that document, pages 37 to 48, relatively short section, but it focuses on the diffusion part of change, right? How you push out the change and then how you sustain it, so that over time that change takes hold, it grabs the whole organization and it sticks. The organization doesn't fall back and slide backwards into their old habits. People stick with it and continue to do things in the new way, until the point at which it becomes the normal way, right? Which is what Connor is referring to in his 8 stages of commitment. Once you reach that last stage, the commitment stage, that's when everybody just has bought into the change. They're doing it. They're in the habit of doing it, and it is now the normal way. They maybe don't even remember what the old way was. So that's when you know you're finished. But it takes a while to get there sometimes. So the Everett Rogers diffusion of innovation theory is very relevant and very valuable for any kind of change initiative of any decent size. And so you want to take a look at that video. It does a nice job of summarizing it for you in just a few minutes so that you get the gist of what the theory is about and what the model is about. And then the second video is a bit longer. It gets into more depth, but I think it will help you visualize better how the theory can be applied to change initiatives. And it's got a number of different examples in there provided by Les Robinson, who is a well-known change expert. And so I think you want to, even though it's a long video, I think it's like 40 minutes, something like that, try to stick with it. I think you're going to get a lot of really good ideas, some of which you could incorporate into your team project. So there's that. And then the fourth item is Tipping Point, which is a book by Malcolm Gladwell. For any of you who are into analytics, whether you're sports analytics or HR analytics or whatever, if you're into analytics, you gotta love Malcolm Gladwell. He's an economist. He takes the tools of an economist and he combines them with things that are of interest to us from a social sciences standpoint and helps us figure out, get to some truths and some insights around them. So really valuable contributions that he's made over the years, but nothing more relevant to what we're talking about than this book called Tipping Point, which if you haven't read it, great book. We've provided a summary video in here, just a few minutes long, but it gives you a sense of what Tipping Point's all about. And again, a lot of valuable concepts in there, and this idea of these different types of people that you find in an organization who you can tap into and get them to help you drive this change forward across the whole organization, push it out to the people who might be resistant so that it reaches every corner of the organization and does so in a relatively short period of time so that you can get over what Gladwell describes as the tipping point, the point at which really the change takes hold and we're not going backwards. So 4 really, really good readings. I encourage you to take some time with them, really spend some time with them, get understanding them. Apply your critical thinking, please, in your discussion posts. Make sure that as you're addressing the discussion questions, you're really digging deep, okay? Not just giving surface level information about these models. We can all read and watch the videos ourselves. We don't need you to describe them so much as what we need you to do is really analyze them and apply them to different types of situations that relate to change. So make sure you're doing that. The other thing, I'm just going to back up here, is we have the business case proposal. You guys are submitting that, your teams are submitting that Sunday night or by Sunday night. Make sure that you are also posting it in the week 6 discussion, which unfortunately it's found in week 5. Apologize for the confusion there, but make sure that you are posting it here in this discussion, week 6 discussion, business case proposal. In addition to submitting it under the week 5 team assignment business case proposal. So you're submitting it in both places. One is for grading, where I will look at it. The other, it's for the discussion post, is so that your classmates can all look at your video and give you feedback on it. And they'll be giving you feedback. The feedback posts are due by end of day Wednesday. And then your team needs to reply. It can be a group response. You don't have to all individually respond to every feedback point. But you should, as a group, be looking at the feedback you're getting and making some coherent responses, and those are due by Friday. So make sure you get that stuff done. In addition, your team needs to be working now on the next leg of this project, right? So the change strategy is coming up. It's going to be coming due very soon. So you've got a couple of weeks to get this together. Let me minimize this. I'm going to pull up the project template, which by now you all should be very familiar with. We're going to now focus on slides 21 through the end of the deck here, which focuses on diffusion. change communication, and sustainment. Three very important topics, all really closely related to one another, and that's why I talk about them together in this week. So change diffusion, you'll see Everett Rogers' change diffusion model mapped out here, along with some descriptions of what you, practical descriptions of what you as a change agent and as a team of change agents need to be doing in order to drive change across the whole organization. So this is really just more of a set of tips here. And then on slide 22, you've got your template. So make sure you have this in your change strategy presentation where you are mapping out, you've already mapped out who your stakeholders are, but now you are mapping the stakeholders to these strategies that you're going to develop to leverage your key stakeholders, leverage your sponsors, your key stakeholders, your innovators and early adopters, to try to get them to help you influence and get over the chasm to get to the early majority and late majorities, and eventually the laggards. So that's an important piece. You have some guidance there. Please let me know if you have questions about it. Then on slide 23, we talk about change communication tools. There are a lot of them out there. This course doesn't specifically get into change communications in a lot of depth, but it is an important topic because really all diffusion and change adoption boils down eventually to how you communicate your change to people and with people, right? And how you invite them into the conversation. So these are a few of the commonly used change communication tools that get used out there. And you can see how these relate to time, much like the diffusion model, right? So the stakeholder communications relate to these people who form up your coalition, your powerful coalition, as Cotter would say, at the early parts of your project where you're forming that group. You need to make sure that you have a really good plan for how you're going to communicate with that group of stakeholders. And then that plan needs to then carry through all the way through the whole change initiative. There's pre-launch communication. So what are you going to send out to people? What are you going to do to tease this change that's coming, right? The new movie's coming out. You always see the teaser trailer videos that come out. Those are intended to tease you and to get you thinking about it and saying, "Ooh, this new Star Wars is coming," or new whatever is coming. And you get excited about it, right? Just for a little bit. And then as you get closer, you may get a little bit more. So by the time the thing launches, the movie or whatever, in this case, the change initiative launches, you've already built up a bit of enthusiasm and some momentum so that it carries you through into the early parts of the stage of the change initiative. Then prep communication. So there's a bunch of probably with any kind of major organizational change, you need to prepare people. In many cases, you're preparing managers so that they can have the right conversations with their employees. You're preparing maybe tech support. You're rolling out a new technology or a new process, and there's tech support that needs to be prepared for that, right? Because they're going to be getting an influx of calls about this thing and emails and tickets that are going to be coming up. So you have to prep them, right? So there's a bunch of communications that have to happen before you launch the initiative that don't have anything to do with getting people excited. It's more about getting people prepared for the change from a logistical standpoint. And then there's the launch communication. So when you actually, on the day, there's usually a particular day on the calendar somewhere in the future that you have pegged as saying, this is the date when we go live with this change. Maybe you have a whole week or 2 week period where you're going to be rolling this out. Maybe it's not all happening on one day, but there's usually a first day of your rollout, of your launch. And the launch communication is really important because that is now the beginning. That's the first time that people are seeing that we are going from the old state to the new state. It's for sure. It's definitely happening. It's not a teaser anymore. This is the real thing. It's not a drill. Let's go do it. And gets people excited and primed for action. And that's what you're trying to do there with your launch communications. And then point of need communications have to do with, once you've rolled it out, where are the different points where key stakeholders, key groups that are really central to this change, where they're going to have to do something and they're going to need a little extra support. I sometimes refer to this as hypercare. We use that term a lot. Hypercare is, you're going to target a few different places where they're going to need extra support, and you try to make yourself extra available. You try to free up resources to go be there and attend events or be there close by to support the team that's working on it. You over communicate with that group for that period of time. it is an intense effort to support a group or a set of groups as they're going about trying to implement this change. And so we refer to it as point of need communications, because you are communicating at the point where those different needs may come up. So there's that. And then there's pulsing communications, which is just a regular drumbeat of communications that you're going to be sending out or engaged in throughout the life of this project, to keep people updated on what's going on, to share success stories, to maintain the momentum that you've built up through your launch communications. And to sustain the change, you got to keep communicating, because once you stop communicating, people will assume or will forget about it. It'll go off their radars, and they may let their guard down, right? And at that point may revert back to old behaviors, or they may misuse things, or they may think that this is just sort of a flavor of the month thing that's going away now. So they'll change their focus. And so you want to keep this top of mind for folks for as long as you feel you need to, in order to get it to the point where this is institutionalized and people have fully embraced it and fully committed to the change. At that point, you can maybe slow up your pulse communications, dial them down, and go get to some sort of level that is more of a long-term sustainable level. But for some period of time, you're going to be pulsing communications out pretty frequently. I'd say probably weekly for many initiatives. So these are 3 or 6 very common types of communications or categories of communications. Again, different groups, but also just like with your change adoption and stakeholder mapping, right? You're thinking in terms of different groups, but you're also thinking of different types of communications that will be needed at different points in time in the life of this change initiative. So I think that's a very important concept. That's what this week's all about, is thinking in terms of time, change over time. So related to that, then related to this slide on slide 24, this is a template for what you would include in your change strategy presentation, a communication strategy. What are the different components of that communication strategy? Feel free to borrow and steal from slide 23, but make it your own, right? Make sure you apply it to the types of change that you're talking about, to the different stakeholder groups that you're focused on with your project, and to the particular timeline that you have in mind. Speaking of timeline, then on slide 25, there's a template for your CMC change management communication roadmap. So this is something that is very common in change initiatives. It's sometimes referred to as an implementation plan, but roadmap is probably the most commonly used term for it. Typically, not always, but typically it starts with a launch date somewhere in the future. It says, okay, on this date we launch. And then it goes in both directions. It says, okay, here are the things that are going to happen after the launch, the different communications that are going to roll out, the different types of support, the different elements or pieces of the change that we're going to roll out at different times, maybe in different places and maybe different parts of the world, or different divisions get the change rolled out at different times. But the point is, a bunch of stuff happens after that launch date. And then there's a bunch of stuff that happens before the launch date in order to get everybody ready, yourselves included, for this change. So that's why it's sometimes referred to as a T-minus plan, because your T is the launch date, and then you work backwards from there, T-minus 1 week, T-minus 2 weeks, T-minus a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever the lead time is for the change. And then as of the launch date or the T date, you have T plus 1 day, T plus 2 days, T plus a week, T plus 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever, 12 weeks, so on and so forth, for that particular launch window that you're talking about. So that roadmap could extend for quite a while. It probably will be at least a 3-month type of thing, where you are rolling it out and really reinforcing it for a few months. And for some changes, it could go 6 months, a year, even a couple of years. So the roadmaps can get pretty big. And so you sometimes will break them up into phases and say, okay, this is phase 1 of the change. That's going to last for the first 3 months, and then phase 2 will kick in at the end of month 3, and that will last another 3 months or another 6 months or whatever. And you might break that up into phases and have different plans for different phases. But anyway, the point is, it can get super complicated. For our purposes, give me some sort of a simplified CMC roadmap for your particular change. Doesn't have to be overly specific. You don't have to get everything in there, but at least show me that you understand how this works, so that if you needed to implement an organizational change at your organization in the future, I can feel comfortable that you can create a CMC roadmap for your change. And that'll really impress your friends at work, by the way, if you're able to build something like that. And then the last piece of your change strategy, but a very important piece, is your sustainment strategy. And you'll see this talked about in the standards, the ACMP, sorry, standard document. They focus quite a bit on sustainment, because one of the most common things that happens with change initiatives is that there's a big launch event. You have a launch, it goes great, everybody's excited about it, and then it fizzles after a few weeks. And then management and the whole change team start to focus on something else. And the rest of the organization's like, well, all right, maybe they weren't serious about that change. So then they revert back to their old behaviors. And now this time with a bit more cynicism, because they know that you weren't really serious the first time. So when you come back and you want to reintroduce that thing, or you want to reintroduce a new change initiative, people are a bit more cynical about it. So really important to follow through on your change initiatives. I always tell leaders, the CEOs I talk to and other change leaders, I say, look, if you're not serious about sticking with this change for the next 6 months to a year, then don't even bother, because it's going to take people a while to really understand what you're trying to do and to make the change. As we all see, everybody goes through this change curve, right? This grieving process for the old way of doing things. And so we're introducing this disruption. It's going to take a while for us to get to a normal place again. And if you aren't willing to stick it out with them and support them through this change, then what you're basically inviting is for the whole organization to slide backwards to the way they used to do things. And this change initiative isn't really going to accomplish what you wanted it to accomplish. So you got to sustain it. And by sustaining it, I'm talking about doing things that make it feel like this is institutionalized, that this is permanent, that there's no going back to the old way of doing things. When Christopher Columbus sank his ships out in the harbor, it was a way of telling his people, that his crew, that we were there to stay, right? And then we had to make the most of it and make it work. And you see similar types, you see that metaphor used sometimes, sink your ships, as a way of, say, committing to the change. In other words, let go of the idea that you're going to go back to the old way of doing things. And so there's some ways in which you can do that. And the standards document talks about some of those things: measurements, metrics, right? And being analytics majors, many of you, that should be a really valuable thing to hear, right? That analytics is a big part of change management. And in sustaining the change over time, if you have analytics that you're able to use to show the changes that are happening and the impact that it's having on the organization, then that is helping to reinforce over time the value of that change. And it's more likely that people will stick with it. And even just the fact that you're measuring and showing the numbers is one way of reinforcing the fact that these things are important. So what you measure tends to be what you are driving in terms of behaviors. But that's not the only way to do it. The continuing pulsing change communications, the celebrating of wins, the recognizing of effort of people making the changes and making the swings, so case studies and success stories all help to sustain the change. And so you want to incorporate some combination of strategies that will help you sustain your change so that it doesn't roll backwards. Right? So whatever that combination is, make sure you identify those different components here, here on slide 26, and as part of your change strategy. And that's the last major piece of your change strategy. Anything else you put in there is icing on the cake. But those, up to this point, up to slide 26, that's really the crux of your change strategy presentation. You're helping your stakeholders understand, here are the different groups that we're going to be targeting. Here's how we're going to get them to change their behaviors. Here's how we're going to get the change to spread across the whole organization. And then lastly, here's how we're going to get that change to stick long-term. So that's your change strategy there in a nutshell, those 4 bits, which are encapsulated in these slides here. So hopefully starting from slide 17 through 26, those are the tools and the templates that you'll be using for your change strategy presentation. So hopefully that's helpful, and hopefully you're seeing now the connection between this template and this presentation you're doing for the project and the readings that you've got and the discussions that we're having in class. All of this should start to now tie together for you. If it doesn't, please talk to me, but we're in week 6 now. Things should start to gel for you. And I should expect to see through your presentations, you pulling through these different ideas from the readings and from the template, so forth, and all the tools that were provided, be able to see that course content coming through in the way you're presenting your content and the substance of what your presentations have in them. So anyway, I look forward to reviewing your business case proposals this week and giving you feedback. I'll do my best to turn around that feedback for you as quickly as possible so that you can make course corrections that might help you with your change strategy presentation. Well, thank you so much. Enjoy week 6, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.